Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Wisco Whiskey Review. I'm Jeff, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Old Forester 100 Proof. Now, full disclosure, I shot this last week, whole video, had it done. And then I realized that I didn't have the attachment that I needed for this microphone into my new camera. So I had to scrap that. There was no audio, so this is a reshoot. I have most of my notes, the historical stuff for Old Forester. I didn't write down any of my tasting or nosing notes, but I have the scores I gave it then. So I'll just kind of make sure that it's still around that, level, and then I'm still going to go through all of the notes and everything. This will be fresh. I haven't had anything today, so my review and my reaction is still going to be, fairly similar to what it would have been before. So we're going to take a look at this. To get into the history of Old Forester, if you didn't know, it's owned by Brown-Forman, which is the same company that owns Jack Daniels. They own Woodford Reserve. They do the early Times Bottled and Bond, which I did a video of just a couple weeks ago. They're a pretty big company. They own quite a few different brands. They're a big operation. So to get into the history of Brown-Forman, it was started in 1870 by a guy named George Garvin Brown. Now, he had recently moved to Louisville to finish high school, and then he was a pharmaceutical salesman at that point. So he started Old Forester in 1870. Originally it was bottled at 90 proof, but then with the Bottled and Bond Act coming in at 1897, it got bumped up to 100 proof. Now, this is part of Old Forester's core lineup. Their kind of bottom of the bottom shelf offering is 86 proof. That's just their standard Old Forester. This is the next one kind of above that. This is the 100 proof one. Now, this isn't Bottled and Bond. They do have a Bottled and Bond, which is part of their Whiskey Row series, which was 4 different whiskeys that they released. I believe it was in 2017, 2014, something like that. You can correct me down in the comments. But for a few years now, they've been rolling out. They came out with 4 different whiskeys, and one of them was a Bottled and Bond. So this is not that. Even though it's 100 proof, it could just be, the fact that it's not aged in a bonded warehouse. Could not be distilled in one distilling season. It could be a number of different things that, there's so many variables that go into Bottled and Bond that, even just one of them, if you miss it, you can't label it that way. So this is still 100 proof. This is a non-age stated, so it doesn't have a minimum age statement. I would guess this is between probably 4 at the youngest to 6 or 7. I wouldn't think it's much older than that, but I could be wrong. The mash bill on this one is 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley. Now, I mentioned that this is also, bottled kind of under the same roof as Early Times Bottled and Bond. That's also 100 proof. Again, same company, but this does have a different mash bill than Early Times. And actually, what I'm going to do is at the end, I'll just kind of compare the two of them. So now that I've kind of gone over just the history of Brown-Forman a little bit, I think we're gonna take a look at the whiskey here. Now, this one's almost gone. It had a little bit more in it last week when I was reviewing it, but like I said, I had to scrap that. So I will probably kill this one tonight. There's not much in there. And once the level gets down past, say, a quarter full, at that point the oxygen is reacting with it quite a bit, and you're gonna want to get that drank up pretty quick. I'm not advising just to go nuts, but if you have some friends or want to share some samples of something, you can also add this to an infinity bottle, which I'll try to get into in a different episode, but that's just where you are constantly adding things to a decanter, which is kind of a fun thing to do. So you can do that. I do that. I've got a bourbon one. I've got a Scotch one. Again, I'll go into that in a different episode, but that's one thing you can do. You can also, once it gets down to about halfway or so, you can just decant it into a smaller bottle, and that's kind of one way to save on the oxidation if you've got a really special bottle that you're trying to keep as fresh as possible. So we're going to take a look at this whiskey. Again, non-age stated, 100 proof, from Old Forester. We'll take a look at the color. I wouldn't say it's super light. It's about average kind of darkness, that, you know, kind of copper, a little bit of golden amber. You know, the legs are sticking to the glass pretty well. This one isn't non-chill filtered, so this one has been chill filtered. So, you know, like with a lot of the ones out there, kind of your bottom to mid-range, those are mostly going to be chill filtrated, or chill filtered. So, you know, it's not going to have quite that super oily mouthfeel necessarily, but, you know, it still could be a good pour here. All right, let's go in for the nose. I'll go over the nose, the palate, the finish, and the value, grade all of those from 0 to 10, and then average it out. And again, I've got those, you know, down from before, but, you know, I stay pretty consistent, you know, and that was just last week, so there's not a huge gap in between. You know, it's not like I reviewed it, say 6 months ago, and it's just been sitting here. This whiskey should be almost exactly the same as it was a week ago. All right, so I'm getting, there's a lot of butterscotch and caramel right off the beginning here. So for this one, and with a lot of Old Forester products, I know this is the first Old Forester product that I've reviewed, but I've tried a few of them now, and there just is a nice kind of deep dark sweetness, very similar to the early times with this one. So again, Brown-Forman just kind of has, they also have a banana profile that a lot of people get, but also just kind of a nice sweetness, like a creme brulee, you know, kind of that toasted brown sugar, dark molasses thing going on. And that's what I'm picking up on the nose first and foremost. There's just a little bit of spice maybe on the back end, you know, your baking spices, typical to bourbon, but it's just very sweet coming off the front here, which I tend to like sweeter bourbon, so that's appealing to me, but it might not be super appealing to other people. Yeah, the only thing is, you know, it's just not super complex. There's a little bit of depth there. There's a just general overall sweetness. I'm getting that banana, that caramel sugar, dark brown sugar, to be, you know, if I'm being precise about it here. I mean, it's a good nose. It's just not overly complex, but it is pleasant. We'll go in for the palate now. So with this being my first sip of the day of any alcohol, I am getting just a little bit of that ethanol kind of burn, but it's not super bad. I'm gonna let that dissipate a little bit and then go in for a second sip so I can kind of pick out a little bit more of those flavors. I'm getting a little bit more of the baking spices on the nose after taking a sip. I know sometimes that can change, so I would definitely, you know, explore the nose again after you've had a sip. Sometimes it opens up different things that either you didn't notice before or that kind of come out stronger after you've had it. So what I'm picking up on the palate definitely matches the nose pretty closely. There is just a little bit more of the baking spice that I'm picking up, again, kind of in like the mid to back range on the palate, that I wasn't picking up quite as pronounced in the nose. So it is a little bit more balanced. It's not just quite as sweet as the nose was making it seem, which I like. I think this is a good palate. Again, it is in the sweeter category. I'm not going to say this is a super spicy bourbon. It is fairly balanced, but it does lean toward that sweeter category. So again, if you really like super spicy stuff, if you're more into ryes or a high rye bourbon, this might not be your thing, but I know I myself like sweeter bourbons. I know there are some others that do, so I would definitely give this a try. And I'll get into the value and everything later, but you know, so far, as you can tell, this one's almost gone. I've been, you know, sipping on this one pretty regularly just because it's a very enjoyable drink. So we'll try this one more time. Yeah, there's that banana, which is, again, kind of very specific to Brown-Forman products. You know, Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, Old Forester, the early times. A lot of people get kind of a banana, even some other tropical fruits too, you know, like mango, guava, things like that. But banana is the one that usually sticks out the most. There's a little bit of kind of citrus. That baking spice kind of comes in again, mid to back palate there. So I'm gonna go and we'll nose this again, and then I'll grade it. All right, so that hasn't changed much. It did open up a little bit, again, a little bit more of the spices and stuff after I've had a sip. We'll give the nose a good 6 on this one. I think it's pleasant. It's just not super complex, and you know, I just wish there was a little bit more going on with the nose. But you know, it's not a bad nose by any means. There's no off-putting scents or any kind of weird things going on in there. It's good. It's just I wish there was more going on with it. Let's get into the palate. I'll try another sip. All right, so again, like before, I think this is really solid. There's enough proof there to kind of carry forward a lot of these flavors. It is balanced, but it is also sweet, which I tend to like. So again, my grade, you know, might not correspond with how you view this one or how you would taste this. These are all just my opinions, so you can take them, leave them, you know, won't hurt my feelings. You know, comment if you've had this one and if you do agree or disagree with, you know, with my notes, or whether or not you think this is a good one. I think I'll give the palate a nice round 7 on this one, because it's very solid. You know, it's not, I don't think it's gonna blow your mind if you've had a bunch of bourbons before. You know, there's nothing that's gonna like just completely wow you, but for the price, which I'll get into later, you know, the availability and everything, I think this is just a solid bourbon if you're more into those, you know, sweeter ones. And I think there's enough spice to round it out to where, you know, even if you're a seasoned bourbon drinker, I think there's enough balance there to kind of keep you going back. All right, so now we're going to talk about the finish, and now that's going to be kind of the flavors that you get after you've drank it, and also the length of those flavors. So whether or not they stick around for a while, whether they disappear completely. So we'll take a look at that. So this definitely isn't a bad finish. I'd say it's about medium long, and I'm getting a lot more of the baking spice on the tail end. Once the sweetness kind of goes away, there's not a whole lot of sweetness left. On the back end, it's mostly the baking spices coming in there, which again, I enjoy. I think that kind of rounds out, you know, the nice sweetness, so that it's not just like a sickeningly sweet, you know, overload sugar bomb on this one. That spice is kind of nice to round it out. But again, kind of like with the nose, I just wish there's a little bit more going on with the finish. I wish it either kind of took a different turn, or, you know, was just a little bit more complex. It is kind of like just a baking spice note on the end there. So we'll give the finish a 5.5. Again, I think it's good. It's, you know, a little bit above average, but again, it's not going to blow your mind. It kind of makes you want to go back to the nose and the palate. So that's it for the finish, and now we'll talk about the value. And I think with this bottle, value is one of the stronger points of this one. As far as the price goes, in my range here in Wisconsin, it's about 25 to 30 bucks. I think it's, at least for what I can find it for, it's in that 25 range. You might find it for 30. It shouldn't be above that, depending on where you live in the country. Availability is really good because it's Old Forester, it's Brown-Forman. Their distribution is crazy good. So, you know, you should be able to find this where you're at. And again, the price shouldn't fluctuate too much. It's not like a, you know, a craft whiskey or bourbon that's gonna bounce around a little bit, depending on the market. This should be right around 25 to 30 bucks. So I think for what you're getting on this one, this, again, like with the early times, I'd categorize as a daily sipper. You know, this isn't something that, you know, it's not a super special bottle by any means. This is just something you can crack open. You don't have to feel bad about, you know, pouring it a couple times, you know, during the week or whatever. When it's gone, you can easily go out and get another one. It's not gonna break the bank. I'd say there are a few other bottles that offer very similar things to this one, or a very similar value, but it's a little bit better. Like your Wild Turkey is right at that price point. Your Evan Williams Bottled in Bond, that at least you're getting, you know, an age statement, same proof, and it's about, you know, 10 bucks less or so. It's about 15. So, you know, there's some other bottles that might have more value, but I think this is very strong. Again, you're not paying out the ears for this at all. It's 100 proof, it's got great flavor. So we'll give the value a good 7. And that brings us to our total. So if my numbers are correct here, my math, we've got 6.375 out of 10. Now, I think that's very respectable. Like I said before, this isn't gonna like blow your socks off, crazy good, anything like that. But for what it does, I think it does well. I think you could easily mix this in cocktails and it should stand up. This one, with being a little sweeter, it might kind of get lost with some cocktails. It doesn't have that nice rye kick to kind of, give it a little bit of spike or stand out. But, if you're looking for a nice mellow old fashioned, I think this would be a good one to go with. So what I'm gonna do is compare this one now to the Early Times Bottled and Bond, because like I said, I think that'll be a great comparison. It's they're both Brown-Forman products. They're both 100 proof. The Early Times is bottled and bond, so there is that age statement. But like I said before, I think that this Old Forester is probably at least around 4 years old. There aren't too many bourbons that are main name brand ones that fall under that category. They have enough stocks where they should be putting out at least 4 to 6 range. So all right, and as I said before, if you haven't watched my review of the Early Times Bottled and Bond here, this one, if you factor out the price per volume, this one is a little bit cheaper than the Old Forester. I believe this one is about 25 bucks to 30, but that's for a liter. So I think the math ends up being like around 19 and some change, for a 750 or equivalent. So let's take the nose on this one. Already I can tell that this is different, even though it's the same parent company. I believe this is even distilled at the same location. I could be wrong about that. It gets a little confusing sometimes between, distilleries and if they're distilling for other companies, umbrella companies, things like that, who's under who and all that kind of stuff. It gets a little confusing, but they're both Brown-Forman. They're both made in Kentucky. The mash bills are different though. Like I said, the Early Times Bottled and Bond is 79 corn, 11 rye, and 10 barley, versus the Old Forester, which is 72 corn, 18% rye, and 10% barley. So there is a 7% difference between just the corn and the rye makeup, with the Old Forester having 7% more rye than the Early Times. So theoretically, the Early Times should have just a little bit more of that kind of corn sweetness to it. Going for another nose. Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm picking up. There is just a little bit, slight more sweetness, kind of that corn musty note going on with the Early Times than with the Old Forester. There's a little bit more of that rye coming through with the Old Forester that you don't quite get with the Early Times. We'll try sips here. So already, I think I'm leaning more towards the Early Times as my favorite of the two. There's just a little bit more sweetness again, but there's enough rounding it out to where it's not sickeningly sweet again. There's a little bit more of that corn mustiness, kind of that grain note in there. And kind of before, and like I said with my review of this one, there's just a nice kind of caramelized dark brown sugar going on with the Early Times that I just really, really like. And the Old Forester has it too. It's just not quite as pronounced because I think it has more rye in there. I mean, they're very close. If I was given these, blind, I could easily see, someone mistaking these for the same thing. That's how close they are. But I think I am leaning towards the Early Times as being just a little bit better of a taste profile, and even the nose for me. Again, all things aside, these are both great whiskeys. If you haven't had either one of these, I definitely recommend trying, either one of them or both. Even doing a side-by-side like this, I think it's really helpful to kind of determine what you like in a bourbon. And also, since these are both great daily sippers, just which one you might want to buy, if you're looking for that in the near future. So these are both fantastic. Again, Old Forester 100, 25 to 30 bucks for a 750. I gave it a 6.375 out of 10. The early times, let's go back in my notes here and look what I gave it. So the early times I gave a full point higher, and I think a lot of that had to do with just the price point difference, but also, again, since I like sweeter bourbons, the flavor profile just kind of stood out to me a little bit more as enjoyable than the Old Forester. But I really enjoy Old Forester. I like pretty much all of their products. Their rye is fantastic. Their 1920 is really, really good. I want to try all of the Whiskey Row series. Again, there's 4 of them from Old Forester. That'll be a different video, you know, after I've acquired the rest of the bottles for those. Thanks for watching, guys. You know, I hope you learned something here. I hope that you enjoyed this. It was entertaining enough. And yeah, I've got my old set back. I've got a new camera. Hopefully the audio works and checks out this time. So I'm hoping now that I've got this back to just be releasing a lot of content in the near future. So I'll link my Instagram, my Patreon, and everything down below. Thanks for watching, all the support. You know, leave some comments whether you've had either of these two before, or just some other ones that you think are comparable. And yeah, again, I'll be putting out some new content here shortly. So thanks again, guys. We'll go with the Old Forester since that's what this video is about. And we'll see you soon. Keep on sipping. Cheers.